Hey, Kyle and Adam here from ProjectionHub, back with another edition of SBA Burning Questions. And we have another one of our favorite kind of videos we like to talk about. And that is a Reddit post about a real person evaluating a potential acquisition deal that they're planning on using SBA to accomplish that. And so we're going to go through the quick breakdown of their scenario here, and Adam is going to advise them like he would if we were the ones kind of guiding them through the SBA process. So here we go. The setup is we got a first-time business buyer in Ohio, wants to acquire a small business. They spent years running a family business, so hiring, training, all the operations, but they've always been the employee, never the owner. They're doing this solo. They don't have a ton of liquid cash, and they're weighing two potential deals that they're exploring. Business A is a service business. It's 2 years old. They're asking $975,000 with $500,000 down. Reports $400,000 in SDE. Seller will finance part of it. Catch: one SBA lender says it may be too new, could get treated like a startup. Runs on contractor technicians, receptionist, coordinator, handle scheduling and customer communication. His worry is keeping key people from walking after closing. Business B is a trade show product business. 5 years old, asking $985,000. Seller claims $600,000 in SDE. But the buyer thinks normalized earnings are closer to $385,000 after scrutinizing the add backs. There's a big revenue jump in 2025, explained by attending more shows. His worry is working capital. The business must pay for shows, inventories, flights, etc. The core problem is funding the down payment. SBA typically requires a 10 to 20% equity injection, obviously, and he's trying to consider his options there. He'd rather borrow it from a private lender than give up ownership and equity. One lender said he would need a strong co-borrower. Sounds like one lender offered a smaller, more flexible program, but it was much below the amount he would need for that acquisition. So the question for you, Adam, is some honest feedback, I think, to just like accomplish the acquisition. So I guess maybe give your 2 cents on the two business models, and as a lender, which one you think you would favor, and if the down payment, the equity injection is the problem, some potential ideas on how he can approach that for these two.
Yeah. So on business A, if I'm reading that and understanding that correctly, if the asking price is $975 and they're asking for $500,000 down, that means they're willing to seller finance $475, I assume. So if the seller's willing to do that, then they're probably willing to put a seller note on full standby, which they only need to do that for 5% of the total purchase price. So it'd be like $50,000 effectively. If it's on full standby, meaning no payments on it until the SBA loan is paid off, the buyer can use that $50,000 as equity in the deal. So they'd only have to come up with $50,000 of their own money. So that's probably the way to, get the most leverage in a deal, I guess, is you're required to come up with 10% down total, but 5% of that or half of it could be your cash and half could be a seller note on full standby. So yeah, that's my initial thought on like reducing the amount of equity injection down to just 5% on that one. Seller's probably going to be willing to do that. Honestly, too, if the SDE is as strong as it looks like, then you might be able to borrow more. So that could be the way to sweeten the pot for the seller is, hey, you don't have to seller finance $475,000. Why don't you just seller finance $100,000? I'll get you more up front, but this last $50,000 portion is going to be on full standby and probably won't be paid on for 10 years. So that's one thought there. I don't necessarily think that the 2-year-old business is a problem, especially if it's got 2 full years. I think that should be enough to be willing to look at as an acquisition. So I don't think there's really any particular that I've heard of from an SBA lender. I don't think there's like a particular rule that says in order for it to even be eligible for an acquisition that it must be a certain age. I think it's mostly just lender discretion. Lender just would like to have more history to look at, I'm sure.
Yeah. I feel like I have heard, that's probably, he's the buyer in this case. So I think it's probably lender and buyer discretion. Like you might have buyers who are interested in looking at a deal that's only 2 years old, but based on the information they gave, I think because they're under like an NDA for both of these, they obviously can't give like super detailed information. So we don't know exactly what kind of service business we're talking here. But the fact that it is a service business, like let's say it's like HVAC, repair or replacement or whatever. Like that kind of the business model probably wouldn't scare you as much 2 years old because there's a lot of track record there, stability, demand. Like there's a lot of good things for that kind of an industry versus if it's a name a service business that's more volatile, then maybe a lender wants to see 3 or 4 years of trend to see if it's like up and down. But there's probably some industries there that they're probably more inclined to be comfortable with because they have a more like linear growth pattern.
Yeah. So business B, I mean, I like that it's older. It's still not that old, 5 years old. The interesting, like the difference between 600,000 SDE and then is what the seller claims, and then only having 385, yeah, with normalized earnings. So that's a little bit concerning. The working capital. So the business must pay for shows, inventory, flights, hotels. Yeah. I mean, typically what you want to do in your LOI is you want to say that you're acquiring the business, assuming that the seller is going to leave you a sufficient amount of working capital to operate the business, or like a normal regular amount of working capital to operate the business. So you can look historically like at the month-to-month financials of the business and determine like how much should they need in working capital on a regular basis. And sometimes if it's like really seasonal, it could be that, in the worst month, you might need $100,000 of working capital. And so you want to see that. That may be a negotiation with the seller. They may not like give you enough working capital for the worst month. They may give you like an average. So maybe they leave you $50,000 in the bank. So then you're going to need the lender. You're probably going to want the SBA lender here to give you a line of credit if there is, especially if there's seasonality or just working capital need. You probably want that line of credit on top of whatever the SBA loan for the acquisition is.
Would you say if you had to choose, like if you were this person's best friend and you had to choose, would your gut tell you A versus B? Or at least I'll speak for myself. B to me as like a lender with the lender hat on, like a trade show business to me sounds pretty volatile. Like it sounds like it could be totally dependent on a lot of different factors. They have to replace their customers like every single month, every single season. There's probably just some more difficult factors in there versus it's like service businesses probably have steady demand depending upon what the kind of service is. They might even have customers on maintenance plans or different things like that are like a little bit more reliable. And I don't know if like when you see something like big 2025 revenue jump, you made the comment like how it's 5 years is still pretty young and 2 years to you isn't necessarily a rule. SBA lenders might not be able to lend to that, but you could also say like the more history you have, the more chance there are to show like what if year 3 was down, like what if 2025 was up and then 2026 was back down? Like that would also kind of spook a lender too. They don't like to see the numbers go down year to year. And I guess in this SDE number, we don't see profitability either, right? Like is that SDE all like owner compensation, or was the business like pretty profitable each year too? So those are some of the things that stick out to me as to why I think business A looks a little more attractive, but I don't know if you've got a different take.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing I like, if we understand this correctly, with that $975 purchase price and $500,000 down, that implies to me that the seller's willing to seller finance like half of the deal, which, if you get that seller note structured correctly, and even maybe some potential like forgiveness or contingency in there if you don't hit certain revenue thresholds or whatever, that I think reduces your risk quite a bit. And also like you don't want to default on the seller note, but much rather default on the seller note than the SBA loan. So, you're kind of reducing your risk, I think, with a larger seller note. So I kind of like that. And to me, 2 years versus 5 years, especially with a big revenue jump in the most recent year for business B, like it kind of feels like the same. 2 years versus a 40-year-old business feels different, but 5 years is still pretty young. So I don't really give a whole lot of extra weight for that. But there's a last question here. He says whether private or personal loan can legally cover an SBA equity injection. No, the lender wants you to have true equity, like true skin in the game. So if let's say before you applied, you already had a HELOC and you drew on the HELOC, you drew $50,000 on the HELOC and you had that sitting in your bank account on on the day that you applied, then I think the lender's probably okay with you using that cash. If you didn't have it, if you had no cash and then you go out and borrow 50 grand from somewhere, that's where you're probably going to run into trouble. Not really supposed to do that. So,
yep, I agree. All right, well, there you have it. Another edition of SBA Burning Question. If you're out there and you're watching this and you're evaluating potential deals to buy a business, or you're thinking about going into that process and you would like this kind of advice on how to evaluate a deal or continue proceeding with one, feel free to check out our free SBA review. That is linked down below, should be popping up on the screen somewhere here as well. And we ask just a few questions to get this kind of background information, and you can get Adam's kind of tailored feedback for free on what he thinks about the deal, or approval odds, or different things like that you're looking for. So check that out. We appreciate you checking out the video, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.